Our story begins in a magnificent kingdom with a beautiful white castle perched on a cliff. Inside, the queen is appointing Joran Tamer as the new frontier lord. This gets the crowd whispering, while Joran wonders if she got the title wrong. But the queen, annoyed by the whispering, tells everyone to shut it. She then turns to our boy, asking if he's deaf or something, and she follows up, demanding to know why Joran hasn't accepted her command yet. This makes our hero break out in a cold sweat, visibly nervous under the pressure. Meanwhile, a status window pops up in front of him, leaving him totally clueless about what to do. All Joran can do is beg her to take back the order, but little Joran whispers to himself, wondering if what he's seeing is a status window. This only makes her angrier, as she asks what he just called her. Our main character is left baffled by her reaction, with no idea what he did wrong. The queen then yells that calling her, "Your Highness," means he doesn't recognize her as his sovereign. Joran quickly apologizes, saying his mind went blank, overwhelmed by her immense grace. And finally, a hooded man appears and shows the new frontier lord the fiefdom he will govern. This leads the nobles around them to gossip about the so-called Apocalypse City, commenting that the place is full of monsters and has no citizens or even a market. But the queen gets fed up with the chatter, slams her sword down, and orders silence. She then announces that Apocalypse City no longer exists and is now called the Tamer Fief. A map of the area is then displayed for everyone in the hall to see. A minister stands up, asking what a frontier lord is, since he's never heard of it. The queen informs him that's normal, as she just made the title up herself, and Joran is stunned by this news, while someone congratulates him on his luck, and his queen declares that Joran is the first in history and tells him to protect her subjects well. Joran then thanks Her Majesty for her grace. She raises her sword to conclude the ceremony, but instead of tapping his shoulder, she smacks him right on the head with the sword. All our protagonist can do is curse up a storm in his head over the situation. It's revealed that in the game's story, Joran Tamer was supposed to become the captain of the royal guard, but due to an incident, he would have met a pretty tragic end. And the guards comment that the captain has been acting strangely ever since he was resurrected, wondering if the ritual went sideways. Our MC starts freaking out, wondering why of all people he had to end up in Joran's body. He deeply regrets accepting the quest that brought him to this world. We then flash back in time to his old life as Bang Ho Young, a 27-year-old guy, and his daily routine was taking care of his younger siblings, ever since their parents passed away 3 years ago. And so that's why he worked his butt off at a logistics center. He wanted to give them a better life. And after grinding away at work, lunchtime finally arrives, and he heads to the break room. Turns out, the only fun our hero had was a mobile game called Rain of Dice, his little escape in his free time. He opens the game and thinks about which character to use for the daily quest. He quickly picks the shaman Bada, who has the ability to convert enemies into allies. And with this little gem, he didn't even need to recruit troops, since he could just yoink the enemies. The match begins and a giant ogre appears before him, but our guy uses the conversion ability without a second thought to turn the beast into his soldier. Now, all he needed were a few more troll shamans to complete his army. He ends up winning the match with 3,500 points to spare. Suddenly, a strange notification pops up on his phone screen while he's playing. It announces that an exclusive seasonal quest called Defense of the Apocalypse Fief has been unlocked. This confuses Joran because in the game Apocalypse was a city, not a fief. But upon reading the description, he's shocked by the insane reward the quest offers. Whoever completed the quest would get 10,000 per point and 5 mythic grade items. With his eyes sparkling, he starts dreaming about the fortune he could make selling those items. However, a warning states that the quest is in hardcore mode, and if you lose, there are no do-overs. He thinks it over, since selling his current items wouldn't even get him 5 million won. But with the quest money, he could give his siblings a good life, so he decides to go for it. The moment he accepts, he feels something strange, and his eyes widen in terror. A mysterious voice announces that ultra-hardcore mode will be applied, and failure results in permanent deletion. And right after that, a giant terrifying dragon appears, roaring in his face. The system says he can't quit or log out due to the ultra-hard difficulty level. Engulfed in a blue aura and terrified by the dragon, he screams in despair. And that's the story of how he ended up possessing the body of the character Joran Tamer. In the game's lore, humans can only be resurrected once by a priest. Joran asks the status window about the time in the real world. The system informs him that time in his world has stopped. This brings immense relief to our hero, who was worried about his younger siblings. After being named the Frontier Count, he is now in a company tent. There, a red woman named Lillian calls out to him, asking if he's okay. Our protagonist says everything is fine, but the system shows that Lillian is disappointed in him. He thinks about how whenever he looks at someone, their stats appear, and a curious Lillian asks what he means by status window. Her comment makes the protagonist look at her, breaking out in a cold sweat. Lillian mentions that he kept repeating that phrase on their way there. This makes Joran realize he has to say it out loud for the window to appear. Not knowing how to explain the situation, Lillian asks if he remembers the first time they met. Our hero says yes, while thinking that he's unlocked her multiple times in the game. Finally, Lillian asks if he remembers what he said to her that day. In a flashback, we see Lillian crying alone in a dark forest. The original Joran approaches to comfort her. Our protagonist then says they should go together. This makes Lillian look at our hero with tears in her eyes. Back in the present, a soldier reports that the troops are waiting, and Joran then touches Lillian's shoulder to get her attention. And with a smile, he repeats the same phrase, saying they should go together, and this leaves Lillian surprised and overjoyed that he remembered that moment. Shortly after, Joran and his soldiers gather on the field, and so he thinks that the average conversion of the soldiers is at 50, a pretty low number. Furthermore, Joran understands that no one would follow him to Apocalypse City, so he asks the original Joran for help, as he doesn't think he's eloquent enough. Our protagonist knows this is the moment that will decide everyone's future. One of the soldiers asks what will happen to their company, but Joran says the choice of where to go is theirs alone, leaving everyone surprised. Joran states that many nobles mocked him for being exiled, and with a raised fist, he questions what the point is of having wealth and glory all to yourself, and so he shouts that he'd rather share the hardships and joys with everyone. The system announces that the soldiers were moved and their conversion rate increased slightly, and so, he guarantees they will be able to say with pride that their lives were worth living. The system informs him that the minimum conversion of the soldiers has increased significantly. Our protagonist promises they will win lands that not even the founding king could secure, and so, moved by his speech, the soldiers shout that they will follow him to the ends of the continent. Joran smiles satisfied as he hears his men chanting, "Long live the Count of the Frontier Lands." Shortly after, the system informs him that his passive skill has leveled up. After sorting things out with his men, Joran returns to the Queen's castle. There Her Majesty asks why he has returned to speak with her. Our hero humbly asks her to arrange for some attendance for him. The Queen questions him, saying she had already entrusted the fate of his men to him, and he explains that the soldiers chose to follow him of their own free will, and she then asks why he needs more attendants if he could simply hire them. Joran says he intends to take some convicts in exchange for granting them pardons, so later he arrives at the prison and tells the guard he wishes to release some prisoners, and so our hero makes it clear he doesn't want to visit but to actually set the criminals free. A jailer suggests a prisoner, calling him a baron, but Joran corrects him. He then introduces Jagel, a criminal sentenced to 15 years for multiple thefts. Joran complains that the jailer is trying to push troublesome criminals onto him. He thinks that none of these guys are actually useful to him. However, looking to the side, he sees someone who catches his eye. A blonde priestess, which makes Joran wonder why she would be imprisoned. The guard explains that she is Luvia, and she was accused of 2 murders, but in reality, she only offed 1 person, and so he reveals that the young woman took someone out, resurrected them, and then took them out again. The jailer replies that doppelgangers are monsters, not humans. Luvia defends herself, saying she didn't take out a person, but a monster, and she yells that the creature was selling children to dark mages. And so hearing this, our protagonist thinks they really got what they deserved. Luvia then asks if our hero knows why she did it twice. Joran answers that it was because he could only be resurrected a single time. The priestess smiles and confirms he is absolutely correct. Furthermore, she says if she could, she would have done it 100 more times without a second thought. And she then introduces herself, and the system announces that she is an important character. Our hero analyzes her stats and thinks that even though she's dangerous, she's quite strong. Luvia asks if there's something on his face, and he says he has a proposal. He offers her a position as a priestess with special privileges in his fiefdom. Luvia asks what kind of privileges he's talking about. Our protagonist reveals it's the right to punish all who are guilty. With a smile, Luvia accepts the offer and decides to join him immediately. And so finally they shake hands and Joran welcomes her to the Tamer territory. After recruiting Luvia, our hero continues walking through the prison and asks why the ceiling is so low. The guard explains that it's the area for prisoners of other races, like dwarves and half-breeds. Joran then sees a boy with elf ears and asks what his crime was. The guard replies that he was arrested for theft, so Joran asks what he stole. The prisoner himself chimes in, saying he tried to steal a woman's heart, but when that didn't work, he stole her house deed instead. Joran is surprised by this crazy logic and decides to check the guy's stats. His name is Bonal, a half-breed dungeon mercenary who suffers from kleptomania. Additionally, his skills as a scout and trap disarmer are excellent. Our hero thinks that having a mercenary would be much more useful and decides to try and convince him. So, he comments that spending 6 years in prison must be tough for him, but Bonal complains that the food is so bad not even goblins would eat it, and the labor is forced. Joran realizes that food is weak spot and gets a brilliant idea. He offers to free him in exchange for his help, guaranteeing delicious meals every day. Bounal is tempted but says he could just buy food from the outside with a little money. To prove his point, Joran asks the guard what's on the menu for the night, and the answer is disgusting. With a look of disgust, Bono can't even process what he was supposedly going to have for dinner in prison, and so he desperately shouts that he accepts going to Joran's territory without a second thought. With a victorious smile, our hero welcomes Bono to the Tamer territory. Shortly after, we arrive at the mansion Joran earned for his deeds in battle, and it turns out he only had one butler and one maid, and the butler had already bailed out of fear. Our protagonist then remembers who the only remaining maid is. In a flashback from 4 years ago, the original Joran is on a mission in the desert. He asks a soldier who the people they just rescued from bandits are. The guard explains that the pink-haired girl refuses to leave, even though she's free. Curious, the original Joran approaches and asks if she has nowhere to go. Finally, he invites her to come with him and his men. The girl is surprised by the unexpected invitation. Back in the present, Joran realizes the maid is the girl the original Joran saved. With sparkling eyes, he wonders if he should sell the mansion to get more money, but the maid overhears and thinks he's going to sell her, leaving our hero embarrassed. The maid's name is Peach, and the system reveals she is completely obsessed with her master. With a smile, she says she will follow him to the ends of the continent, and our hero awkwardly thanks her. But with a terrifying look on her face, Peach says that if he abandons her, she will hunt him to the ends of the earth. A system warns that the chance of convincing her to leave is 0.001%. Our protagonist feels uncomfortable with such a young girl calling him master all the time. Noticing his expression, Peach gets closer and asks if he's feeling sick. She then pulls him into her lap, saying she heard he usually suffers from headaches. Joran feels suffocated by her closeness and asks her to back off a little. Peach is shocked by his words and doesn't understand why he's being so harsh, and he tries to explain that he just needs a little personal space to breathe. He asks her to stop calling him master, but Peach starts throwing a huge fit, and so seeing that he's getting nowhere, he changes tactics and says he understands her heart. With that, the maid finally calms down and agrees to follow his orders. Our hero thanks her for her loyalty and says he has something important to tell her. Finally, he reveals that the journey will be long and their destination is a true nest of monsters. He warns her that the comfort she knew in that house will no longer exist, and furthermore, she will have to deal with hardships that go far beyond just taking care of him, and he assures her that he won't force her, and she can simply stay and look after the house if she prefers, and he concludes by stating that either of her choices would be a great help to him. Suddenly, an achievement notification pops up and he gains 20 experience points. Joran is completely confused, not understanding where that random reward came from, and so it turns out Peach misunderstood everything and is now completely smitten, commenting that she'll do anything for her master. With sparkling eyes, she says she will follow her master and do anything for him. With that, the system announces her taming level has increased significantly, and Joran says they'll negotiate her salary after they hunt some monsters. But as they begin their journey, our hero runs into a problem. His horse won't obey him at all. The system shows it's an unnamed warhorse that dislikes carrying anyone other than its master. The animal has noticed that something has changed about its master, so the system offers an instant taming option. Our protagonist gets annoyed because the system just wants him to waste his experience points. Lillian finds it strange, as he used to be an excellent rider, so Joran thinks about giving the horse a name. He decides to name the horse Mayong because it's so difficult to handle. Instantly, the status window appears confirming Mayong's taming. The horse neighs with happiness, and our hero is finally able to mount it without any trouble. It turns out the animal was happy to receive a name, and that increased its taming level. With everything settled, Joran smiles and tells his team they can finally set off, and so, they thus begin their journey along the Fordwick Highway, which connects the capital to the rest of the country. The place was protected by angelic blessings, so monsters couldn't get close. Despite this, our hero complains because the roads seem to go on forever. During the trip, Lillian approaches and strikes up a conversation with our hero. She says she has something very important to tell him. Joran realizes that's why she was staring at him and feels bad for having suspected her for no reason. Our protagonist asks why she wasn't resting as he ordered, but Lillian apologizes. And so, he says she doesn't need to apologize and asks her to just tell him the information. With a serious face, Lillian reveals that monsters are appearing on Road to Rainfa. Our guy is shocked by the news, as that place was supposed to be safe. She explains it's not a rumor, as she saw troops being sent to the Western Plains. Joran is frustrated because he was hoping for a peaceful journey, so Lillian then asks what he plans to do, saying they need to decide whether to continue or take a detour. Our hero becomes thoughtful, as this is a decision that will affect everyone. The system then appears and gives him two options: move forward with dangers and rewards, or take a safe detour. And so he wonders if he should choose the risky adventure or go the safe route. To Lillian's surprise, our protagonist asks for her opinion on the matter, and so but she gets flustered and says she will follow whatever decision he makes, as he is their leader. However, she suggests they don't tell the rest of the group about the monster appearances. Our protagonist questions why, and she explains that the troops' morale will drop, causing confusion. But Joran disagrees, as he needs to tell everyone the truth, regardless of the path they choose. Lillian apologizes, and he says her words of merit, as he also considered keeping quiet. And despite this, our guy comments that he can't do that, as it's his duty as the group's leader. He explains that the panic would be much worse if they encountered the monsters without any warning, and so concludes that the only way to remain calm is by not being caught off guard by the enemy. With his decision made, our protagonist raises his fist and shouts for everyone to halt the march immediately, and so he then announces that monsters are appearing on the road leading to the western plains, and so the soldiers complain about their bad luck, but one says it could be a good warm-up for them. Luvia smiles and says she was worried the trip would be too boring. Meanwhile, Boonal complains, saying he'd rather have stayed in his cell than go through this. Another starts complaining about a breach of contract, but Lillian yells for everyone to be silent, and she warns that anyone who speaks before the leader will be considered insubordinate and punished for it. And finally, Joran announces his decision to take the main road, as there's no guarantee of safety on the detour. He then turns to the porters and assures them that as their employer, he will protect all of them. Furthermore, he explains that even on the detour, they could encounter wild beasts or even bandits, and so our hero says he doesn't care if they break the contract, but it would be safer to travel with them. And so with that, the system announces that his passive skill has leveled up and the porter's discontent has decreased. One of the men says he understands but asks for a pay raise due to the extra danger of the mission. So the system creates a new choice point: paying up will anger the soldiers, and not paying will delay the journey. Joran is furious with the situation because if he chooses the first option, the soldiers will be dissatisfied. He realizes the soldiers would be angry if the porters received extra pay. Our protagonist remembers going through the same thing when trying to persuade the maid, Peach, but he recalls that last time, he managed to create a third, different option for the situation. With a smile, our hero says he has a better proposal for the porters. He offers to share a portion of the spoils from the defeated monsters with all of them. In return, they would have to cooperate with the soldiers by building barricades and traps. The porter smiles and accepts the proposal, saying they will work hard to help. And finally, Joran agrees but makes it clear that the rewards will go to the soldiers first. Until that moment, they belong to the kingdom. That's why he couldn't reward them as he wished, but things have changed. He then declares himself the Marquis appointed by the Queen and says that now, they are all his vassals. With a raised fist, he promises that whoever defeats monsters will also gain great wealth. The system announces he has found a solution outside the given options, and everyone's level has increased significantly. With that, everyone starts cheering and acclaiming Joran's name. After a while they arrive at the Western Plains relay station. There, Joran asks a guard if monsters have appeared, and he confirms that trolls are nearby, and he adds that he received an official warning in case a merchant caravan is attacked. Our hero then asks to be informed of any urgent news that arises. Later, we see our protagonist sitting on the grass, resting a bit. Peach then approaches him and asks if her master isn't too tired. He says it tickles and tells her to rest too, as she's being over the top. And Peach thinks he's different and complains about walking so much that she wants a donkey. But our hero refuses, saying he can't give special treatment just to her. And she calls him a heartless master in her thoughts but says she'll endure it, because one day, she will get to sit beside him in the carriage as his partner. Meanwhile, the soldiers talk fearfully about the monsters on the road. One of them wonders how this is possible, since the road was blessed by angels. Shortly after, Luvia approaches the soldiers and asks for a light. She then holds out her pipe, and lights her peace pipe. With a smile, she asks a soldier if he wants to know why the monsters appeared. She explains that the angels were negligent and didn't do their job properly, and so she adds not to worry about lightning strikes because she can revive anyone who gets zapped. A soldier asks what happens if a priest gets hit, and her answer is quite sinister. With that scary response, the soldiers become terrified of the crazy priestess and disappear. Luvia then sits down and thinks about the story of the lightning. She complains that if the angels were competent, the lightning would strike the monsters, not her. The priestess then turns and offers the pipe to our protagonist. Our guy reaches out and takes the pipe. He thinks his siblings would be horrified, but then he remembers this isn't his real body. Luvia then asks Joran what he thinks about the monsters on the road, and so, our hero thinks that reality and the game have merged, but he can't tell her the truth. The priestess explains that a 500-year-old blessing wouldn't last forever without maintenance. Joran agrees, and Luvia asks about his parents, and he reveals they passed away in an accident. Luvia apologizes and asks if monsters were the ones who took them. He confirms but thinks that a criminal with 4 prior offenses can't be considered human. The priestess says that in that case, they have something in common. Our protagonist agrees with a smile and says they should work well together. But suddenly, Joran raises his fist and shouts for everyone to halt the march. Lillian is startled by the sudden order and asks what's happening. A quest then appears to protect the wagons from the monster Mandragorani. Our hero recognizes the name and remembers they were very annoying pests in the game. It turns out they are deer, like monsters that scream to slow down their enemies. Joran complains that the system doesn't say where they will appear but sees something moving, and so he finds the movement of the leaves strange, as he realizes there's no wind blowing at the moment. With tension in the air, everyone in the group is on alert due to the unexpected situation. Our hero then shouts that mandragoranis are nearby and gives orders to the troop, and the soldiers obey and form a circle of spears around the wagons to protect them. Finally, he orders the archers and Peach to use wet cotton to plug everyone's ears. Joran orders the second and third squads to follow him in a search formation. He then yells for Bouna to throw a rock into the bushes to lure out the monsters. Obeying the order, Bouna throws the rock into the bush. With that, one of the mandragoranis comes out of hiding. Our protagonist is terrified by the creature's deafening scream. The monster then runs towards them, and Joran shouts for the cavalry to attack. But suddenly, our hero stops and starts thinking about something important, and so he remembers that he has never used a sword in his life and becomes completely desperate. Even in his panic, he thinks the whole situation is priceless. Lillian, beside him, doesn't understand anything and wonders how they will handle this. Meanwhile, the soldiers on the ground scream in pain from the monster's roar. Our hero then realizes that even with cotton, they are still suffering from the noise. The system informs him that one of his traits has been activated, nullifying the scream for him. However, he remembers that this ability doesn't apply to their mounts. Desperate, Joran yells for Luvia to quickly protect the horses. But it was too late, as the monster's scream was already affecting them. With that, Luvia's horse starts rearing up in sheer terror. Our protagonist's horse also panics from the noise, and the animal then starts running uncontrollably through the forest. Joran is carried along and can't do anything to stop the beast. Mayong then starts bucking to try and throw our hero off its back. With the sudden movement, Joran loses his balance, and his horse throws him into the air. Finally, our protagonist is launched in the air, screaming desperately. Our hero, Mare, faces the mandragorani, which stares back with its red eyes. With a terrified expression, he lets out a scream of pure desperation, but in his shock, he lands right on top of the monster, defeating it and gaining experience and an achievement. The system even congratulates him for defeating the boss, and our hero is left speechless. However, he realizes he is surrounded by several other mandragoranis calling for their leader. The creatures look at Joran with pure hatred in their eyes, and he starts to sweat again. And suddenly, his soldiers appear and shout that they will protect their lord at all costs. With their support, our hero gets up and thinks he's going to teach these monsters a lesson. The system explains that the monsters are afraid because their leader has been defeated. Furthermore, he can try to tame them, but the chance of success is only 40%. Despite the challenge, our protagonist shouts and uses his reformation ability. With that, he manages to tame 2 mandragoranis, which instantly become his new allies. Joran then gives a command to his new companions on the front line, and so obeying the order, the 2 creatures scream with all their might at the rest of the herd. The monsters are completely terrified by the scream of their former companions. With sword in hand, our hero prepares to fight the monsters. He charges forward with incredible speed towards his enemies. With a smile, Joran celebrates because his game tactic worked perfectly. The system explains that the scream of a tamed monster can harm enemies. Now full of confidence, he swings his sword without any fear. Our hero is surprised to find that the sword feels as light as a feather. He realizes it's not that the sword is light, but that he is incredibly strong. Our protagonist remembers that the original Joran was a very powerful knight, and the system informs him that his physical strength has been added to Joran's body. Basically, his maximum strength is now 3 times greater than that of a normal human, and so with a smile he celebrates the strength bonus he got for possessing a knight. Joran is confused by the weird name the system gave this trait. Shortly after, the mandragoranis start getting hit by the attacks. Another monsters also hit dead on. Seeing the advantage, Joran shouts for his men to attack with everything they have. But the tamed monsters refuse to attack, as they are still related, and so Joran is confused because they weren't like this in the game and wonders if the taming failed. Annoyed, he tells the creatures to stay back and scream if he's in danger. Suddenly, Lillian screams desperately to warn our hero of the danger. A mandragorani runs towards them to attack our protagonist from behind, but Lillian doesn't waste any time and readies her spear. With a leap, she strikes the creature right in the head, but the monster's scream drains the strength of the nearby soldiers. Joran understands he needs to finish them quickly and orders everyone to aim for the throat. One of the monsters, with a bleeding forehead, lets out another powerful scream. Our hero commands his new allies to scream. The first scream comes out at the perfect time. Joran smiles because fighting with a support that weakens the enemy is very useful. He continues to coordinate the attacks, telling one to scream while the other waits, and so, the second mandragorani lets out a deafening roar at the enemies. With the tactic working perfectly, the monster is hit and falls defeated to the ground. Lillian is completely baffled and asks why the monsters are fighting each other. Our hero says he'll explain later and asks her not to attack the 2 that have separated. Meanwhile, the other mandragoranis lie on the ground after the battle, but suddenly, our protagonist notices that the rest of them are fleeing and wonders where they're going, and it turns out they are running towards the supply wagon. Realizing the danger, Joran shouts for everyone to go after them and protect the wagon. Seeing he needs to act fast, Joran shouts to one of the tamed monsters for him to ride it. The creature is confused by the request, and our hero explains he needs it for the chase. Lillian is surprised and can't believe what her lord is doing. To everyone's surprise, Joran manages to get on the adult Bambi without any problem. With a smile, Joran comments that when you don't have a horse, you gotta improvise. Our protagonist then charges forward, riding the creature to catch up with the monsters. Meanwhile, a soldier shouts for the vanguard to get in position to protect the wagon. On top of the wagon, Bouna prepares to attack the approaching monsters. Bouna shouts that they chose the wrong opponents to face. He then throws a rock with all his might, hitting one of the mandragorinus right in the mouth. With the impact, the creature falls to the ground, defeated. However, the other Bambus maintain their posture and continue advancing towards the carriage. The soldiers immediately assume a defensive stance with their spears, so Luvia thinks that her lord is much braver than she imagined. Finally, she begins to pray, asking her god to protect the weaker ones in battle. Luvia's powers are beautiful, making the battlefield with the Bambus glow. The holy light makes the creatures uncomfortable. It turns out Luvia is using her faith to ask for a little divine help. With her eyes glowing, she finishes her prayer, releasing immense power. Shortly after, several rays of light fall from the sky like an airstrike. The mandragorinus are hit and stunned by the priestess's power. Seeing the chance, Joran shouts for his men to create a barricade and surround the monsters. They quickly push the wagons and form a wall to corner the enemies. One of the mandragorinus realizes they are trapped and panics. It turns out the wagons were modified with a special secret for battle. Now, the cornered Bambus face several spears pointed at them. With a smile, Joran welcomes the monsters to his dear farm. He reveals that it's not a war wagon but a sword carriage. With everything ready, our protagonist excitedly shouts to begin. But his tamed monsters complain, and Joran scolds them for looking like hungry dogs. With his sword raised, he smiles and bids farewell to the monsters, saying goodbye to them. And he stops when he sees a monster with a conversion level of 12 and offers to spare it. Our hero then holds the creature and welcomes it to his territory, and so he thinks this is just like a gacha game and that he's going to work them to the bone. Our hero shouts to Lillian and his men not to take out the monsters, as he will turn them into allies. Worried, Lillian approaches and asks if her lord is feeling well. Joran assures her he's fine, but she says she's referring to his head. She questions if the side effects of resurrection drove him nuts, wanting so many monster allies. The soldiers are also confused and find the idea of taming monsters very strange, and the system then warns that everyone's conversion level will drop if he doesn't convince them. Annoyed, our protagonist says he already knows that and notices something in his hand. He sees the monster's fur on his glove and thinks that since it's soft, it could be very useful. Joran gathers everyone and asks them to listen, even if the idea sounds ridiculous. He explains that after being revived, he awakened a new special ability. And finally, our hero reveals he can convert monsters and calls his new allies to prove it. The two mandragorinus approach, and the soldiers wonder why they look so strange. The system announces that the creatures are terrified by the slaughter, and the soldiers stares. Joran then calms them down and promises them delicious hay if they behave. To prove his control, he orders one to lie down and the other to balance on one leg, and the soldiers are shocked to see the monsters obeying and realize their lord's ability is real. Satisfied with the demonstration, our hero praises the monsters and tells them to rest. And so, the creatures move to the back of the troop, and the men comment that they've never seen anything like it. Lillian and the other soldiers now seem convinced of Joran's ability. Our protagonist explains they will be useful for carrying heavy loads and weakening enemies, and so he then holds one of the monster's horns and asks if anyone knows what it's for, and Joran reveals that the horns and leaves have a powerful healing effect. To prove his point, he asks Peach to bring some hot water, and she obeys. He then calls a soldier named Yak to come closer, and the young man gets nervous. Our hero describes the soldier's health problems, who is surprised he knows about them. Joran smiles, thinking that the status window showed their status, including their ailments, so he offers a tea made from the horns. Our hero guarantees that if anything goes wrong he'll take the blame, and the soldier feels more at ease. With Yak decides to trust his lord and drinks the tea in one gulp. Suddenly, the soldier feels an incredible energy and is surprised by the drink's effect. Lillian then holds Yak's hand to check his pulse up close. The soldier confirms he feels much better, and she says his condition has improved. With a smile, she compliments the young man's soft hands, making him blush. Joran interrupts and offers to share the horns with another soldier, explaining their value. He thinks that if they can always obtain this ingredient, it will be great, and so our hero then says they will have to cut the monster's horns from time to time. And Joran explains that taming monsters is nothing new, and there have been humans with dragons before. And however, Lillian questions if the monsters might turn against them later. Our protagonist reassures her, saying he can see their rehabilitation level. Luvia smiles and says it seems fun, as she always wanted to punish a monster. Our hero asks if they will attack humans, and the creatures desperately deny it. He offers them a simple contract work for food and a comfortable home. With that, he earns an achievement and his rehabilitation skill levels up. Joran then asks if anyone still objects to taking the creatures with them. Finally, the mission is successfully completed, securing many points for our hero, and so our hero thinks that rehabilitation doesn't give points, but he doesn't care about that. He congratulates everyone and announces a big party to celebrate, but suddenly, someone questions if the meat they are going to eat is from the monsters, and so Lillian explains they need to get rid of the bodies to avoid attracting other creatures, and she reveals they are roasting the meat for dinner, and so, our hero assures them he wouldn't make them eat something he wouldn't eat himself. Meanwhile, the cook Jerry complains about having to cook monster meat. The system shows that his food is nutritious, but it looks pretty gnarly. Luvia then prays to purify the monster meat before the meal. With her prayer, some disgusting parasites start crawling out of the meat. Joran tries the meat and says it's more edible than it looks. He then asks the cook to follow his instructions in the kitchen. Jerry doubts the food will be good, but our hero just complains about his tick. Our protagonist tells him to separate the fat that's attached to the belly. Then he asks him to wrap the fat around the loin, and Jerry thinks it's a waste. He ties the meat with string and throws some herbs on top for seasoning. Next, our hero places the loin on an iron plate and takes it to roast. Joran asks them to skewer the ribs along with some whole onions. Our protagonist then decides the meat will be served medium rare for everyone, but the cook complains and Joran gets annoyed, telling him to stop making noise. Our hero grabs a pot and a curious Peach asks what's inside. He reveals it's soy sauce and thinks he should have bought more kimchi. The cook finds the seasoning disgusting and doubts the master will like it. However, Joran says that the taste of the feast residents is what matters most. He even adds alcohol and tea to the pot, and Peach thinks it's black magic. Our protagonist then asks Peach to squeeze some fruits for the seasoning. The cook announces the meat is grilled, and Joran tells him to let it rest. Shortly after, our hero starts slicing the meat, which looks very juicy. He then sprinkles some salt and offers a piece for Jerry to try. With some hesitation, the cook finally opens his mouth and tastes the meat. He is shocked by the flavor and his eyes widen in surprise. With his head down he apologizes and Joran forbids his tick forever. Shortly after, the system announces that his passive skill has leveled up to 6. The soldiers now eat the meat happily, praising how tender and tasty it is. And so our hero then tells the cooks to go eat and takes over the rest of the work. With that, everyone starts to feast and enjoy the food with great joy. But suddenly, two men smell something different and wonder what it is. With a confident smile, Joran prepares to present his new special dish. He announces that the name of the dish is Mandragorani Bulgogi. Finally, a delicious dish appears, and everyone shouts in amazement at its appearance. Night falls, and the full moon illuminates our hero's camp. After the big feast, all the soldiers sleep soundly in their hammocks, but Lillian remains awake and thoughtful, and she wonders how Joran, who never cooked in his life, is now making dishes with monsters. Moreover, he even served the food to everyone with a smile on his face. And as if that weren't enough, he is now even taming evil creatures. Despite everything, Lillian decides she will continue to trust her captain, not her lord, and suddenly, a shadow appears in the tent, and she asks if Joran is still awake. With that, she slowly approaches the tent, but the shadow in the tent catches her attention. Lillian screams his name in despair, thinking something bad has happened. Without a second thought, she throws herself towards the tent. However, our guy was inside, training with a straw dummy, so Lillian is completely embarrassed and yells that he scared the heck out of her. She asks if Joran was training and he confirms he was. Lillian feels a bit awkward about the situation, and there, inside the tent, she finally starts questioning our hero about everything. He then explains that after being revived, he forgot how to use a sword and control his aura, and so, she comments that she noticed that in the fight and that his grip on the sword was worse than a rookie's, and so Lillian says losing memories is normal, but there's one thing that makes her very curious, and she questions how his strength increased so much if he forgot how to fight. After all, he threw a heavy monster with one hand and cut down others with no difficulty. Joran then jokes that maybe when you lose one thing, you end up gaining another, but Lillian is still suspicious about his ability to tame monsters, and he assures her it's real. She criticizes him for accepting criminals and using monsters, saying the old Joran would never do that. Our protagonist asks if it's cause it goes against a knight's honor. With a serious face, Joran answers his own question: honor doesn't feed or protect their people. Lillian tries to argue, but our hero cuts her off. He sets his sword aside for now. Finally, Joran says he understands her confusion, as he is also lost with all of this. With a smile, he asks Lillian to give him some time to get used to it. He promises he will try his best to be the man she knew and trusted. Our protagonist also asks her not to tell anyone about his memory loss. Lillian apologizes for doubting him and says she only caused trouble, but she decides she will help him recover his skills and asks him to pick up the wooden sword. Our hero is confused, and Lillian reveals she will be his new sword instructor. Shortly after, the two are already on the training ground, and Joran remembers that in the original story, he was the one who taught Lillian how to fight. Though with the wooden sword in hand, she says she will return all the lessons he taught her and strikes at Joran. But the lesson ends with our protagonist taking a good whack to the head. Later, Peach tends to his bump and says she won't forgive Lillian for hurting him. Joran tells her to go rest, but the maid asks if she can't stay by his side. He jokes if she wants to mix the rest of the bulgogi seasoning, and Peach calls him mean. Alone, our hero stretches and complains that his whole body is atching, but he's satisfied because he managed to train and even understood the basics of aura control. Our hero thinks his strength is great but his technique is garbage. He thinks his sword is only good for defense and not as a main weapon. He rules out bows and firearms and decides he needs real firepower, and so he then gets the idea to create a hand cannon that he can carry with his strength. And with a smile, our hero thinks the idea is perfect, as he wouldn't have to fight up close. Suddenly the system unlocks a passive ability called Nation of Gunners, and Joran is happy because he served in the artillery, but he worries about the materials to build the weapon. The system informs him that his fief is rich in minerals including mana stones. Joran remembers he has one of those stones but still needs technology. The system then suggests he recruit dwarven engineers or mages to help him. He recalls seeing dwarves in the prison and thinks a mage would be very useful. And the system warns that soon he will have to choose between one or the other. Before he can complain, a soldier runs in with an emergency report. The guard reports that trolls and gremlins have appeared near 2 neighboring villages, and finally he says they need immediate help, which worries our hero. Arriving at the village, our hero comes face to face with a giant troll. The creature charges and tries to crush our protagonist. He knows a direct hit would crack his skull and remembers Lillian's lessons on how to move, and using what he learned, he manages to dodge the attack and goes after the monster with everything he's got. Our protagonist lands a cut on the creature's shoulder but feels he rushed the blow. Joran thinks the beast is tougher than the Mandragoranus and that any slip up makes his aura disappear, and his sword glows with the blue aura he is learning to control, and the troll gets angry and grabs an axe to continue the fight with even more rage. Our hero is shocked to see that the cut he made is already healing super fast. He decides to use the advantage of his sword's length to deliver quick, small blows. With the new tactic in mind, our guy starts moving very quickly. He then unleashes a swift and powerful strike with his sword. The monster takes the cut, but Joran realizes it wants to trade blows because it heals quickly. Our hero now understands the enemy's tactic and thinks about what to do. If that's the case, our protagonist decides to change the game and attacks the beast from behind. With a kick, our hero seizes the opening and attacks the troll. He then prepares another blow, aiming for the troll's neck. His attack is very effective, defeating the goblin. The giant monster is on the ground and the battle finally ends. Our hero sees the soldier down and runs worried to help him. Yak is badly injured but tells our hero he'll be fine. Our protagonist realizes the troll's stone axe hit him earlier, and so Joran then thinks of using the troll's blood to heal him like a potion. However, the system warns that the blood needs to be purified before use. Yak asks to be left behind and starts talking about his dreams and promises. Our hero thinks he should just shut up and stop raising death flags. He then helps Yak and says he won't forgive him if he passes on. With a serious look, our protagonist shouts, calling for Rani. Suddenly, the Mandragoranus appear, answering their master's call, and so Joran orders one of them to take the soldier and flee if they encounter any danger along the way. With the situation under control, our hero gives orders for his monsters to help in the battle, but from a distance, he sees the soldier Rio in trouble with another giant troll and despairs. Rio tries to fight, but the monster is too strong. He then has the brilliant idea to use his ability to tame the monster from a distance. The system then announces that his experience points are being used for the taming. The troll is enveloped in a blue aura and wonders what the heck is happening to it. With a shout, our hero orders the creature to look to the side immediately. The monster obeys but is still confused and asks what Joran did to it. The system shows the creature's stats and warns that it is still hostile to humans. Joran then tells Rio to retreat and let him handle the problematic new ally, and the soldier is worried, but our hero assures him he will hold the front line alone. On command, Rio runs to a safe place while the troll stands there, confused. Suddenly, a smaller troll appears and questions why it is helping the humans. Our protagonist just observes the situation, and the system shows that the new enemy is much weaker than the monster he just tamed. With a confident smile, our hero knows exactly what to do. He points to the smaller troll and shouts for his new ally to attack with full force. Obeying the order, the giant monster charges and uses its weapon against the troll's neck. The troll is left clueless as to what just happened. The tamed troll stands over the other troll. With a war cry, it raises its weapon to deliver the final blow to the enemy. And so Joran thinks that it take crook to catch a crook and that he'll remember this tactic. With the victory, the monster celebrates, thinking it did a great job, but it realizes it was tricked and that humans are very treacherous. Seeing that the monster was about to turn on him, Joran acts quickly against the troll. The top half of the troll then topples over the smaller troll's body. The system warns that the smaller troll has regenerated, so Joran prepares another attack against them. With a powerful and swift blow, our guy finally ends the creature's life. Joran thinks it was worth spending his points to save Rio. Suddenly, one of the Mandragoranus panics and begs not to be the next to go. Our hero then turns to leave but is caught by surprise. Joran gets a little annoyed, but 2 trolls appear or attack the protagonist, and the system warns that the taming ability is on cooldown for 1 minute. Without his best card up his sleeve, he orders his monster to scream when the enemies attack. With time against him, our protagonist now needs to think of a new plan. But from a distance, our hero sees a strange silhouette approaching through the chaos, and Joran prepares to fight but realizes the figure doesn't look like a troll. Suddenly, an explosion occurs, and he wonders if that was magic. Our guy then looks around, as he's never heard of a mage in that village, and so a deep voice then asks what he's looking for around there, and he is shocked to see that the speaker was a dwarf standing right in front of him. Meanwhile, the fallen troll on the ground whispers the name, Trier, before passing out, and Joran then remembers he needs to finish off the monster before it regenerates. However, the dwarf stops him and tells the tall guy not to get in his way. Our protagonist is confused and wonders what the heck that is. With a hammer in hand, Troyer says that once you hit the nail, smashing a rock, he finishes, you should drive it all the way in. With the hammer strike, the rock in his hand begins to glow and get super hot. The dwarf concentrates and prepares to throw his improvised projectile. Finally, he throws the rock, which causes a gigantic explosion on the spot. With the explosion, the troll's body is completely destroyed, leaving only its legs. Our hero's jaw drops, as the power in the throw were like a grenade. Joran approaches and says that was incredible and stronger than explosion magic. The dwarf corrects him, saying his name is Bernival Lunton, not what he said. The system then shows that he is a dwarven engineer who loves explosions. With sparkling eyes, Joran says he's the one he was looking for, but Bernival is suspicious. Suddenly, our protagonist draws his sword without any explanation. Bernival gets scared and asks why he's pulling out his weapon for no reason, but our hero yells for him to stay put and runs past him. It turns out another troll appeared, and Joran jumps to protect the dwarf from the attack. With a precise strike, our guy's sword hits the monster dead on. He yells and uses all his strength to push the creature away. Next, our hero lands another precise blow right on the enemy's neck. The creature tries to say something but only manages a groan of pain. Finally, Joran complains that the pest was very resilient and hard to take down. With sword in hand, our hero prepares for whatever comes next. Relieved, he finally takes a deep breath and sheathes his weapon. Suddenly, Bernival grabs our protagonist's dirty hand, and Joran comments that he'll get him dirty, and the dwarf is confused. With sparkling eyes, Bernival apologizes for having doubted his savior. But the moment is broken by a little boy crying for his mother amidst the rubble. All around, the village is destroyed, and people are crying for their loved ones. Suddenly, Luvia appears and says the same story is starting all over again. She then takes a long drag from her pipe, looking very calm. Desperate villagers run and beg the priestess to save their families, and so Luvia explains they need to gather all the pieces for the resurrection to work. And so one of the men gets angry and yells that she's being irresponsible for not reviving them right away. Seeing the confusion forming, Joran decides he needs to intervene. He asks for calm as resurrection consumes power, and Luvia can't do it all by herself. And Joran says he understands their pain and that the Holy Knights will arrive at noon to help. The system explains that together, they can perform mass resurrections, but not on those who have already been revived. And so finally, Joran asks them to pray for those who have passed and assures them his troop will protect the village. Bouna then appears and scolds the villagers for complaining about the one who saved them. And so with the scolding, the villagers are left speechless and lower their heads in shame. And so with his speech, everyone calms down and thanks the Count and his men for their help in the battle. With that, a notification appears, and our hero's passive ability levels up to 7. Later in the tent, Joran talks with Bernival, who questions him about his name. But suddenly, Peach appears and scolds the dwarf for being so informal with her master. With pride, she introduces herself as the maid of the glorious knight, Joran Tamer. Bernival provokes her, calling her a servant, and Peach shouts that she is a maid, not a servant. To calm things down, Joran asks Peach to bring beer and snacks, but the dwarf says he doesn't smoke. Our protagonist is very surprised by the refusal, as he's never seen a dwarf who doesn't smoke. The dwarf then explains that if he smokes, he loses his sensitivity to the smell of gunpowder. Bernival then asks for a dark beer, and our hero tells Peach to get his order. Finally, our hero apologizes for his maid's rudeness and asks him to just call him Joran. Bernival is surprised and says our hero is very brave for being so direct, and he comments that it's not the title that makes the man, but the other way around. Because if someone changes for a fancy hat, it's because they were already small to begin with. Our hero agrees and asks if he has considered his recruitment proposal, and the system then announces that the chance of recruiting him is 50%. Bernival seems thoughtful and says he has considered the proposal but doesn't think he can accept, and so our hero then looks at him seriously and says he's going to be completely honest with him. Bernival admits he likes Joran and his plan for weapons, but Joran asks what the problem is, since it's not the monsters. The dwarf explains that his concern is not having monsters in the way, but having none at all. With a smile, our protagonist says he's an incredible man and asks why he doesn't accept then. It turns out the dwarf reveals he can't stand being under someone else's command. He would have to swear loyalty and fears his bad temper would ruin their relationship. But our hero reassures him, saying he doesn't want to turn him into his vassal. The dwarf questions if it's a mercenary contract, but Joran reveals he wants him to be an advisor. He explains it would be a weapons advisor, not a subordinate but a teacher, and the dwarf is shocked. Berneval is doubtful and asks if he's serious, as he doesn't want to do manual labor like mining. Our protagonist assures him he wouldn't do that to a talented craftsman, as it would be a waste. The word craftsman hits him hard, and he wonders if anyone has ever called him that before. In a flashback, he remembers being called a lunatic obsessed with explosions who would destroy the mine. Back in the present, Peach arrives with beer and snacks for them to talk better. Berneval gets excited and asks if the beer is from Gallia, and our hero confirms it's the best. The dwarf says Joran knows how to treat his kind well, and our guy thinks he resembles his old boss. Eating a piece of meat, Berneval asks if Joran can promise one thing if he accepts the proposal. His only condition is that our hero continues to provide that delicious food and drink always. With that, a system notification appears, announcing that his influence skill has leveled up to 8. Satisfied, our protagonist smiles and welcomes Berneval to the tamer territory. Later, a blonde knight arrives and congratulates the Marquis on his hard work in the village. But Joran asks the vice commander to speak to him more casually, as he is just a junior knight. The knight refuses, and the system reveals his name is Demis, and his loyalty to the queen is excessive. Demis complains about the scouts, and Joran is shocked to see he is a dragon sword rank warrior. It turns out that in this world, warriors are ranked by swords, and this rank is strong enough to face a dragon. Our hero thinks it's impossible to recruit him, as his loyalty to the queen is too high. Joran agrees with his complaint but says he is also disappointed in the knight, leaving him confused. Demis questions him and says a knight like him shouldn't be wasting time on the frontier. But our protagonist says he has his own reasons and leaves the rest of the work to the holy knights. However, Demis stops him and says he also came as a messenger, making our hero nervous. He reveals that the queen has sent a reward and a proclamation for the Marquis. Our protagonist asks in surprise about the reward, and Demis says she is pleased with his deeds. Joran then kneels to receive Her Majesty's words. The queen congratulates him and grants him 2,000 gold coins to distribute among the soldiers. Demis hands over the bag of gold and asks if he is disappointed with the amount, but our hero denies it. Our protagonist thinks the queen wants him to stay on the frontier and gets annoyed with Demis. Later, in the village of Bojito, the villagers, moved by Joran's help, wanted to follow him, but our hero refuses the request of some children, saying they are too young for it. He also turns down the adults as their stats are too poor for battle. Joran is frustrated because he was hoping to recruit a mage but found no one with potential. But suddenly someone calls him from behind, and he turns to see who it is. Curious, our hero asks who the person speaking to him is. A green-haired girl introduces herself as Meryl, a weather mage, and thanks him for saving her life. And so with that, the system announces he has found a key character and that recruiting her would be a great help. And Joran thinks his choice was correct, as he got a mage, but he's worried about her mana. Meryl apologizes for being a useless mage and asks to join him. Our protagonist then holds her hand to reassure her. With a smile, he welcomes her to the tamer territory, making her blush. And suddenly, the system announces that the tutorial is over and he has achieved an S rank, recruited 2 talents, and 9 monsters. And so finally they arrive at the tamer fief, but the place is completely destroyed and abandoned. As he dismounts, our hero steps on some disgusting grubs coming out of a grain sack. Seeing the situation, Joran thinks the place is much worse than he imagined. Not knowing what to do, he just says he has no idea where to start cleaning up the mess. The system then announces that Chapter 1 has begun, and he needs to prepare for the first defense. Our hero smiles and asks when the defense game will begin. A 10-second countdown then appears and he panics, thinking it's 10 hours. But to his horror, the countdown continues, and time is running out quickly. The countdown throws our hero into a panic as he realizes it's seconds, not days. He doesn't understand, since he chose the main road specifically to have more preparation time. The system then explains that helping the villages along the way consumed all his time, and the mission begins. The window for Stage 1 then appears, and the objective is to defend the East District office from goblins. Our protagonist is worried because the office is still quite far from where they are. And to make matters worse, the system warns that the goblin vanguard has already departed, and they only have 2 hours until the attack. And Joran then sends Mandragorani number 8 ahead to scout the enemy's weapons and numbers, and he then gathers his soldiers and warns them that they cannot let the goblins infiltrate. But the local residents start complaining and wonder if more monsters are coming to the area, and they question whether our hero is there to fight or to drive them into the desert. And so the system then warns that the residents are very anxious and their devotion is dropping fast. A man then says it's strange for goblins to march in units and asks how Joran knows this. He doesn't understand why they would attack a place in ruins, and the system reveals he is a former treasurer. Our protagonist says he has a special ability and swears to resign if the goblins don't appear. The treasurer thinks it's a good idea, but our hero wagers his assets and forbids him from grumbling if he wins. So, with a smile, Joran assures the residents they won't be drafted and that he will take care of everything. Lillian questions him about the promise, and he says he has no assets to give away anyway. He asks if she doesn't trust him, and Lillian says the story of predicting monsters is quite strange. Awkwardly, our hero says it must be a side effect of his new ability, and so he thinks it's easy for him to know everything because he has the status window but understands her suspicion. However, Lillian interrupts him and says she completely trusts her lord. Our protagonist is moved by her trust, and she asks him to give the orders. Suddenly, the Mandragorani returns and reports that 50 goblins are coming with axes and swords. Joran thanks it and asks if it saw anything else, but the creature mentions a black fog. Our hero is confused by the fog and the creature can't explain it well. Joran then asks the system for help to see what his monster saw in the forest. With a smile, he remembers that if he can communicate, he can also share its vision, and the system then unlocks a new ability that allows him to share memories with monsters. Our protagonist complains that such a good ability only appears now that he needs it. The system says it's a bonus and asks if he wants to cancel, but our hero immediately says no. With a smile, our hero asks his monster to remember the fog again. He then touches the creature and uses his new ability to see its memories. Suddenly, Joran is startled by what he starts to see. It turns out the fog is the fog of war from the game, which hides unexplored areas, and just like in the game, he needs to explore to see the entire map. Furthermore, he smells the bad odor of the fog and thinks it might be poisonous. With the new ability, Joran can now feel everything his monsters feel. Our protagonist understands that the fog is to prevent spawn killing, and spawn killing is when you wait for a monster to spawn just to take it out immediately. That's why some games make enemies invincible for a while. Others punish players who enter the monster spawn area. And with a smile, he says he will dominate the first stage and orders everyone to follow him. Shortly after, the troop begins to prepare for the upcoming battle, and his men load the wagons with many weapons and armor for the fight. Finally, the soldiers march excitedly to face the approaching goblins. On the way to the office, one of the supply wagon's wheels breaks. Joran notices the problem and complains that the wheel isn't moving at all, and so he then dismounts and tells them to distribute the weight properly before ordering everyone to get out. Checking closer, our hero sees that the wheel's axle is broken and decides to remove it. With the help of a porter, Joran tries to pull the axle from the wagon with great force. Seeing the scene, the dwarf Berneval comments on how clumsy human work is, and he just watches as Joran and the porter continue to struggle to move the wagon. Annoyed, the dwarf complains that even skeletons would do a better job than them. Berneval then yells at Joran for struggling alone instead of asking for help, but with a hammer in hand, he says he has already finished the repair, leaving everyone shocked. The dwarf then throws a brand new wheel that he just built for them. Berneval asks if our hero plans to use the wagon as a barricade, and he confirms, and so, the dwarf suggests using the front wheels because they don't need anything to keep them from rolling. Furthermore, he explains they were made to be removed and reattached and can also serve as shields. And Joran is amazed by the ingenuity of the dwarves, and Berneval says it counts as weapon production. With everything settled, our hero celebrates what he learned and orders his troops to march in 2 columns. He thinks that if he blocks the objective, the firepower increases, but if the defense breaks, it's over. A system map shows that the ideal would be to place long-range units on the hills. However, he remembers the ground is very slippery and his archers wouldn't have stability. A system tip then warns that goblins are not forest type and have difficulty climbing. Seeing the situation, the mage Meryl asks if she can help as she has never fought so many monsters. Our hero tells her to focus on her magic, and the word forest gives him an idea. Meryl remembers the status window said his monsters were forest type. Joran then calls the soldier Yak and orders Mandragorani number 8 to come to him. Riding the creature, our hero points to the hill, and the monster says it's no problem. To his surprise, the creature manages to climb the slippery hill without any difficulty. With his idea working, Joran wonders how the creature can act as if nothing is happening. The monster offers to show its feet, but our hero says he already knows what they look like. With a smile, Joran then orders the archers and Bauna to ride the Mandragoranis to climb the hill, but Bauna refuses to ride a monster and throw rocks, and even calls our protagonist crazy. Our hero then closes his eyes and takes a deep breath to not lose his patience with their stubbornness. Annoyed, he decides he will use his experience points to resolve this situation quickly. Suddenly, the system announces that the first attack wave will begin in just 10 seconds. An attack wave is when a bunch of monsters appear, and there are usually 10 per stage. With the countdown, the first battle to defend the fief finally begins. Shortly after, an army of goblins with red eyes appears, marching towards them, and Joran then shouts for the archers to aim for the back row instead of the front line. The goblins are completely confused by our hero's unexpected tactic. From the top of the hill, our soldiers prepare, and Joran gives the order for them to fire. With that, a shower of arrows flies quickly towards the enemies. Finally, the arrows hit the goblins in the rear guard dead on, surprising everyone. With the surprise attack, the goblins scream and run desperately to escape the arrows, and Joran then shouts for Bauna to take care of the stubborn enemies still advancing. On top of the monster, Bauna accepts his lord's order with a very serious look. With a precise aim, he hits a goblin right in the head with a rock. It turns out he uses a slingshot to fire several rocks at once. But with the goblins cornered, our hero shouts for the spearmen to get in position. The monsters then realize the path is blocked by a supply wagon. Their leader orders everyone to climb the hill to escape the trap, but the spearmen were already prepared and stick their weapons into the ground to stop them. And so with that, a goblin steps on the spears and injures its foot in the improvised trap. Seeing the tactic work, our hero orders the archers to cease fire for a moment. Joran then tells Bouna to keep throwing, as there are still plenty of rocks. He then orders Mandragorny number 16 to go down and get another bag of rocks. To get past the trap, a goblin orders its companions to step on the bodies of the fallen. With the enemy's new tactic, our hero orders monster number 8 to retreat and come down. Lillian comments that even after forgetting mounted martial arts, he fights well on that creature. With sword in hand, our hero prepares to fight the goblins. She then says his skill with aura has improved, and he thanks his good teacher. Our protagonist then orders monster number 8 to go to the opposite side. With a serious look, our hero prepares to attack the goblins by surprise. The goblins are scared of the crazy human riding the Mandragorany and decide to retreat. On command, one of the goblins turns and starts running, scared of the situation. Their leader is surprised by our protagonist's unexpected appearance. Suddenly, a golden gleam cuts through the air at high speed. On the ground, we see the bodies of several defeated goblins on the battlefield. Our hero is confused and wonders what the heck just happened, and the system announces that the poisonous goblin commander has appeared for the fight. Joran is startled because he was the mid-stage boss and shouldn't be there, and the system shows the creature's stats, which is very strong and doesn't like to retreat. Our hero questions the system and discovers that the difficulty decreased because of his performance. The system explains that his good command and use of obstacles were decisive for his success. Annoyed, Joran complains that he can't afford to go easy and risk his men's lives. The system then warns that difficulty and rewards increase together, and Joran complains for not knowing sooner. But the status window reveals that he would only remember 10% if he knew everything at once. Our hero finds this strangely comforting, and the system promises to continue helping at the right time. Facing the goblins, our protagonist wonders if it's still worth the risk to gain more. However, seeing the monster attacking another goblin, he decides he doesn't need to take that risk. Our guy then points to the big creature and orders his archers to focus fire on it. Immediately, a shower of arrows flies towards the goblin commander to take it down, but the monster uses its arm and armor to easily defend against all the arrows. Joran is shocked by its defense and calls Bouna, who confirms he will aim for the so-called bear goblin. So with the failed attack, the commander picks up a huge spear from the ground. He then breaks the spear's tip on a rock, preparing something new. Our hero looks up, wondering why the creature is throwing the weapon that way. Beside him, Bouna looks very determined and prepares to act against the enemy, but Bouna misses the target and apologizes to our hero for his failure. Joran says it's okay and tells him to keep throwing to at least slow the creature down. Seeing he needs more firepower, he orders monster number 16 to go get Meryl. The creature obeys and runs to call the mage, who is a bit distant. With wide eyes, Meryl is surprised to be called into battle, but she soon understands the gravity of the situation. Joran then confirms and asks her to send a strong gust of wind at the big creature. With that, she tries to use her magic, but nothing happens, and the mage is confused. Our protagonist is also surprised as her magic simply failed. Meryl then starts to cry and apologizes for not being able to help in the fight. She feels completely useless, and Joran realizes he needs to do something. The system explains that in the game, a 20-sided die is used to calculate the attack. However, there is a limit, and in this world, other things affect the numbers besides luck. Meanwhile, the mage tries to stop crying but feels bad about her failure. The system shows that her magic ranges from 1 to 111, and her lack of confidence is holding her back. Joran then says it's normal for her to feel scared with so many monsters around. He asks her not to pressure herself, and that a weak gust of wind would be enough. Meanwhile, the goblin commander just watches their conversation from a distance. Our hero says she is one of the 2 best mages, but Meryl says there are only 2. With a smile, Joran replies that this makes her even cooler and more irreplaceable. With Joran's words, the mage feels special and decides to try her magic again. Her staff then begins to glow with a very powerful blue energy. With a shout, she unleashes an absurd gust of wind towards the enemies. Our hero's jaw drops at the force of the air current she created. The goblins are caught by surprise and can't even stand up in the wind. Even Bouna is startled by the sudden gust of wind that appeared out of nowhere. It turns out the wind lifts a huge rock that flies towards the monsters. With that, the rock hits the goblin commander right in the head, and so the impact is so strong that the boulder cracks in the middle and falls to the ground. Stunned, the creature drops its spear and is left speechless by the blow. Furthermore, other smaller rocks start hitting the other goblins as well. With the rock shower, several enemies are knocked down and left lying on the ground. Seeing the perfect chance, our hero shouts for Bauna to throw the bags he was carrying. Obeying the order, the young man throws several bags into the gust of wind. The bags then open and release a powder that blinds and suffocates the remaining goblins. With the wind, the goblin leader shouts for his troops to group up and keep their heads down. From the top of the hill, the enemies obey and gather, forming a perfect target for an area attack. Meryl then apologizes for being tired, but Joran says her help was more than enough, and so our hero then descends the hill and comments that the angle for the attack is now perfect. With a smile, he approaches the dwarf and asks if he was already waiting for him. Bernival complains a bit for being called to do that boring job. Our protagonist then touches the blue gem attached to his chest to activate it. With a smile, Joran says it's time to show the goblins how terrifying artillery can be. Suddenly, a giant weapon appears, and the mage is shocked, not understanding what it is. Our hero then reveals that it is a mortar, but Meryl has never heard of it. He then shows a primordial magic stone and says it's better than a magic staff. Joran reveals he got the gem at the ceremony and places it inside the mortar to use it. The system explains that unlike normal ones, the owner can choose the attribute of this stone. Our hero then tells the status window to set the attribute to explosive propulsion. The gem glows and he smiles, satisfied that everything worked perfectly, and praises the dwarf for his work. Bernival then says that the stone is not the only thing that fits perfectly. So with that, our hero picks up one of the balls to put inside the mortar. He is surprised because the dwarf actually managed to make a perfect sphere. Excited, Joran says it's time to send the gift, and a passive ability is activated. And the system then asks if our hero wants to name the weapon, and he calls it a mortar for now. With everything ready, Joran puts the first round of ammunition into his new weapon. The status window announces that the magic stone is charged, and the activation word is fire. Our protagonist then asks the system to set the power from 1 to 100. With that, a targeting screen appears, showing the trajectory for each power level. Joran then prepares to fire and decides to use power level 15. The primordial gem he uses as a battery glows intensely. In the next instant, the mortar fires with a deafening sound, and his soldiers are scared by the noise and wonder what that was. The cannonball flies quickly towards the group of goblins. The attack hits dead on and sends several enemies flying, but our hero notices that the goblin commander managed to dodge the attack. Impressed, Bernival says the weapon is incredible and that he shoots rocks as if they were marbles. Joran questions if he didn't trust him, and the dwarf says a dwarf's trust is forever. With the test over, our hero says it's time to fight seriously and asks Bernival for the bombs. With a smile, our hero tells the dwarf to get ready to load the weapon again. But Bernival grabs a hammer, and Joran stops him, saying he no longer needs to hammer the ammunition. The mortar then fires with a purple light, and our protagonist shouts to fire at power 20. One of the goblins looks up with pure hatred in its eyes as the projectile approaches. With a large orange explosion, the ammunition hits the battlefield dead on. The attack is so strong that the goblins are completely annihilated. A mage named Sekup watches everything and wonders what kind of magic his lord is using. Bernival is shocked by the weapon's power and admits our hero was right all along. Joran then suggests making smaller explosive stones to use with bows, but the dwarf doesn't understand. Our hero jokes that he's not an elf and suggests using slingshots like halflings, but Bernival refuses, saying his arms are strong enough to throw the stones. And so Joran then explains that his cannon is different because throwing with hands is very limited. Because with artillery, they can launch the stones farther, higher, and in greater numbers. With sparkling eyes, the dwarf admits he was a stubborn fool and that Joran was right. Meanwhile, Lillian and her men continue to fight bravely on the front lines of the battle. The goblin commander screams furiously and charges forward with his spear. However, Lillian faces him with a serious look and prepares for the confrontation. With her spear, she manages to block the creature's powerful blow. Shortly after, the monster is surrounded by the other soldiers of the troop. From a distance, Joran praises the fight, and Lillian says they can handle it on their own. She adds that against so many enemies, they don't need to fight fair, shifting all the blame for the tactics onto him. Awkwardly, our hero changes the subject and orders everyone to prepare to take cover. He warns that when the enemies get close, they will use a new weapon. The soldiers are confused and ask if it's the explosion they saw earlier. Lillian then shouts for them to obey, and everyone runs to take cover, and she thinks it's strange that her lord is creating weapons but trusts him anyway. Meanwhile, Bernival hands over the new ammunition he just created. Our hero says it's perfect, but the dwarf asks what the hole is for. With a sinister smile, Joran makes a very weird analogy about a dwarf's dinner plate.